Hello everyone, welcome to this week's video, which is in response to a question that was asked after last week's video about what if readers are skipping your scenes. And this week's question is from Eric Whitney. He says, you bring up a great point around the 3:30 mark of that video, asking if a writer would skip parts of their own book. What if we think or know a scene might be boring, but it has to be there for explanation or consistency? One of the novels I'm working on has a later scene where there's a big reveal and things start coming together, but I feel kind of hesitant to get to that point because I think the pacing might feel very slow. So again, as I said in last week's video, it's generally not a good sign if the writer is bored while they're writing something in the story. And this doesn't necessarily mean that what's happening in those scenes or the information that you need to convey is in itself problematic or boring. It just means that you haven't yet established any emotional or personal connection with what you're writing, and therefore are probably in some way phoning it in. And that could be for a lot of reasons, and there are a lot of tricks that you can kind of employ to help you make sure that you are writing scenes that are interesting to you and that you are getting the right investment in so that readers can feel and benefit from that. And I've written an entire post about that, which I will link probably up there, maybe up there, and about how you can troubleshoot scenes and try to just like really milk them to find the most interesting parts, how to create conflict. One of the best ways, even if you're dealing with like really just informational stuff that has to be conveyed, is to bring in a relational aspect and to just really look at how can I convey information in scenes that are also advancing relationship subplots, or something that brings in emotional investment at a little higher level. And then there's also just like, if this is just like so boring and there's no way to really convey it, to dramatize it in a way that's interesting and that justifies stretching it out. Because that's what happens when we dramatize, right? Is that when we show versus tell, is that we're expanding the information. We're taking, what could be conveyed. For instance, I took my dog for a walk, right? I mean, that's really simple. You could write a whole scene about this and about everything I saw and what the dog did, and maybe there's, something exciting that happens along the way to try to jazz up the scene, when really all I'm trying to convey is that I took the dog for a walk. And that's great, and there can be a lot of depth and interesting stuff there, and particularly if it is interesting, you don't want to shortchange it by just telling readers that I walked the dog. But if you choose to dramatize something, you have to know that you're also choosing to ask readers to commit a comparatively lengthy amount of their time and attention to it, because the one sentence to say I'll walk the dog can turn into pages, can turn into a whole chapter as you dramatize every detail. And sometimes that's great, sometimes that's fascinating, but a lot of times it can be really boring. Like, it does feel like the writer is just trying to like fill in the space and check that box and make sure that readers see and experience that this thing happened, or that this information was conveyed. So sometimes you have to evaluate whether it is something that you'd be better off just summarizing and getting past as quickly as possible, giving readers the information that they need in order to move on so that they can get back to the stuff that's actually interesting, versus stretching it out and making them wait basically through a really, really long explanation that could have been really short. But yeah, I think the bottom line is, like, if you're not interested in what you're writing, if you're like, this is boring, I want to skip it, I want to get to the next thing, really look at why. It could be that the information is legitimately boring, in which case you need to find ways to kind of sew it into more interesting aspects of the story. It could also be that you're just not that into it, that you haven't established your own connection to it. And so really look at that. Why are you avoiding this information or this scene or whatever, to whatever degree? It could be that something that's hard to write. It could be something that you don't have enough information about yet and therefore don't really feel competent to write, or that you in fact haven't discovered why this is interesting. Because if it is really pertinent to the story, it probably is interesting and you just haven't, accessed that point. And then deciding whether or not the best choices are to dramatize it, to go full blown and try to make it as interesting a scene as possible with conflict and drama for your readers, or to just summarize, get it over with, give them the information and move on to the stuff that they're really interested in and will be entertained by. Something I always say about plot reveals and about plot twists and that kind of about really cool scenes in general is that they're actually not as important as getting there. That it has to be a payoff for a really good journey. And if the whole point of all these other scenes is just to get to the cool scene, then at its simplest, you're probably just missing out on a lot of opportunities for other really cool scenes. And at the worst, maybe your readers or your viewers get to the really cool scene and think it's great. Maybe they don't. But even if they do, they're probably, not going to have that great of an experience of the overall story. So just some things to keep in mind. And if you'd like me to answer your question in next week's video, please leave a comment. Please consider liking the video, even if you don't have a comment, just to let YouTube's algorithm know that you've interacted with the video in some way. And if you'd like to visit me, you can stop by my site at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com, where I post every Monday lengthy articles about writing and story theory and all kinds of good stuff. So hope to see you there. And if not, I will see you next week.